Hi, everyone. We are about to get started. Welcome. I am Maurice Samuels, the director of the Yale Program for the Study of Antisemitism, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to today's lecture by Hillel Cohen. He's a professor in the Department of Islamic and Middle Eastern Studies at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem and the Cherek Center for the Study of Zionism and Israel. A specialist of Jewish Arab and intra-Jewish relations. He's the author of several books, including Good Arabs, the Israeli Security Agencies and the Israeli Arabs, published by University of California Press in 2008, and Year Zero of the Israeli-Palestinian Conflict, 1929, published by Brandeis University Press in 2013. His latest book, Enemies, a Love Story on Mizrahim, Arabs, and Ashkenazim, was published in Hebrew last summer and will be published next year by Penn State University Press. The title of Professor Cohen's talk today is The Palestinian-Israeli Conflict, the True Story. And before I hand it over to Professor Cohen, just a word about how things will work today. He will give his talk, which should last somewhere between 30 and 40 minutes, and then we will open it up to questions from the audience. You can ask questions at any time by using the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. The chat function is disabled, so you can write questions there, and I will ask them to Professor Cohen during the question period. So we're very, very grateful to have him here today from Jerusalem. It's late there, so we're doubly grateful. And now I will turn off my camera and hand it over to Hillel Cohen. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good evening or good afternoon to you. Thank you, Maurice, for this introduction and for the invitation to talk with you in these very difficult times. It's not easy times, as you all know. I was asked to talk about Israel-Palestine, what we here in Israel call the situation. In Hebrew, we call it Hamatzav. In Arabic, we call it El-Wadr. I think that in order to fully understand the reality we live in today, not to say in order to try to change it, we have to understand in the best possible way how both sides, Israeli Jews and their supporters on the one hand, and Palestinians and their supporters on the other hand, view not only the current situation, but rather the very essence of the conflict. That is to say, its roots and its causes. Or in other words, what are the sources of the current profound enmity that we are witnessing? Now, I guess it is quite clear to all of us that there are contradictory understandings of what is happening now in Gaza, as there are contradictory understandings of what happened in October 7 in Jewish localities in the Negev. For some people, the latter was a legitimate resistance operation of an oppressed people. For others, it was a vicious, murderous attack on civilians. And regarding what is happening now in Gaza Strip, some would describe it as a genocide committed by Israel. Others would say it's a legitimate counterattack aimed at securing the state of Israel and its citizens. Each party, as we know, tends to minimize the scope of atrocities it commits and focuses on atrocities committed by the other side, by its rival. My purpose here, of course, is not to decide between these conflicting narratives. I guess each of you have its own ideas about that. Rather, give kind of historical account in order to help us understand how these contradictory views were created. I would argue that in order to doing this, we should go back to the basic understandings, the conception of Zionism on the one hand, and Palestinian nationalism on the other. In other words, to go back to the roots of the Zionist-Arab encounter and the way each party perceives itself, perceives the other side, and perceives the causes of the conflict. What I will do in the following is to describe Zionism from an internal perspective, to describe Palestinian nationalism in its own terms, and to analyze the encounter between them from both perspectives. It is clear, but I will say it anyhow, that when I speak about Zionism, I speak as an insider, while what I say about Palestinians is, for obvious reasons, external view. It might be true that I cannot fully represent current mainstream Zionism, but still I'm part of the Israeli society, and the Zionist narrative is in a sense part of me. My acquaintance with the Palestinian narrative is of totally different nature. This is not what I heard from my parents or from my teachers in school. And it is not part of me in the same sense. However, I was lucky enough to expose myself to the Palestinian narrative in rather young age. When I was 16 or 17, I started to hear stories from Palestinians. Studying it became part of my thing in life many years before I entered the academia. In a certain way, it is part of me. I think narratives in general are part of what makes human beings what they are. Again, Zionist narrative and Palestinian narrative for me are not the same. And last comment before delving into the narratives themselves. First, I mentioned the above regarding my attitude towards both narratives because I think that one should present his or her approach towards the question under discussion. In my approach, which might be not that popular nowadays, is of empathy towards both sides. Second comment is that my view of both narratives is that they are basically true. When I say that they are true, I mean not only that they exist in the world and influence people, which is a kind of truism, but that their main arguments have a quality of truth. We will discuss it more later on. However, the narratives are more true, if I can use this term, in what they tell us about the in-group, meaning the Zionist narrative about Zionism and the Palestinian narrative about Palestinian history. These are more reliable than what Zionists tell about Palestinians and Palestinians about Zionism. I suggest to remember that in narratives of conflict, in general, and also in our conflict, we can identify four components. Zionists on themselves, Palestinians on themselves, Palestinians on Zionists, and Zionists on Palestinians. Do not mean that when Palestinian or Israelis say we do not commit war crimes, it is the truth. But when they explain what is the essence of Zionism or the essence of Palestinian nationalism, or why they think that they have the right to sovereignty in the land of Israel, also known as Palestine, they present a trustworthy narrative. So after these introductory remarks, let us delve into the narratives themselves, the true stories of the conflict. And please allow me to start with the Zionist narrative, though it might be familiar to most of you. If we try to define the core elements in the development and the argument of the Zionist movement, we can suggest the following. One, the very basic Zionist argument is that the Jews are nation. This is to say the Jewish people constitute a nation in the modern sense of the word. This might be seen trivial today, but it was not so in late 19th and early 20th century. Just to mention a few examples, the Reform Judaism movement in its Pittsburgh platform of 1885 argued that we consider ourselves no longer a nation, speaking in behalf of the Jewish people, no longer a nation, but a religious community. Therefore, expect neither a return to Palestine, nor a sacrificial worship under the sons of Aaron, nor the restoration of any of the laws concerning the Jewish state. The same sentiment that the Jews of the 19th century and early 20th century were not a nation was shared by many ultra-Orthodox Jews who were anti-Zionist, by Jewish communists, by liberal Jews in Germany and France, by Jews in the Muslim world, etc. But for Zionists, and we speak now about the Zionist movement, this was a fundamental, a cornerstone of their ideology. Second argument or concept of Zionism was that their being a nation gives them the right to a nation state. Because late 19th century, the age of nationalism, and the idea is that each nation has the right for a nation state of its own. The third argument was that they have the right to establish this national home or nation state in their ancient homeland, that is the land of Israel. Here one can mention and should mention that the linkage or the attachment of Jews to Zion was part of the mentality of Jews throughout the years, as was expressed in everyday prayers, in weddings, breaking the glass. Is a reading about the land of Israel in the portion of the week. Just last week, we read Parashat Lech Lecha, in which Abraham was told to go to the land of Canaan, and so on. Another argument was based on the horrific situation of Jews throughout Europe. The new anti-Semitism of late 19th century justified their coming to the land of Israel in their eyes. Or in other words, their need for safe haven was so dire that aliyah or immigration to the land of Israel is a moral step. The Zionist movement also, in its very early years, took upon itself to fulfill its goals according to the international law and not to take control over Palestine or any land by power, as reads the first paragraph of the first Zionist Congress in Basel in 1897. The goal of the Zionist movement, so it reads, is establishment of a national home to the Jews in Palestine according to the law of nations, meaning the international law. And what is more important when we discuss the conflict is that early Zionists were confident, or pretended to be, that they will cause no harm to the Arabs of Palestine. It was expressed by Herzl in his famous letter to Youssef el-Khalidi in 1899, and by many other Zionist leaders before and after that. We are coming to Palestine. We are bringing with us development to the land of Israel, which you call Palestine. We bring a kind of Western culture to Palestine, development in the economic level, and so on and so forth. Hence, if we take seriously all the above, we should do, we can fully understand the Zionist self-image of a movement that demands its right with the support of the international community and out of a real necessity, with zero intention to harm anyone. Thus, according to this narrative, if one asks about the roots of the conflict or of the bloodshed, the answer is very simple. The Arabs of Palestine and Arabs in general refused to accept the Zionist idea, the justice that inherited in Zionism, and also the decision of the international community. For example, in years later, the decision of the League of Nations about the British mandate of Palestine and about the establishment of a Jewish homeland in Palestine, the decision of the United Nations in 1947 about the partition of Palestine, and so on and so forth. They refused to do it, and they also rejected each and every compromise that was put on the table as the partition of Palestine that I mentioned, out of belief that they are able to put the Jews outside of Palestine. I think that this narrative is based on facts. More or less, what I said is true, and by itself is strong and convincing. So I think also that if one hears only this narrative, he or she can easily accept it as a true and only story. The point is, this is part of the conflict. The point is that there is another narrative, which in a sense is not less convincing. Of course, depends on the listeners and what they already have in mind. And this is the Palestinian Arab narrative that I will present now. You will see the Palestinian narrative is much more simple. They do not need a plenty of arguments to convince why they and not others have the right to establish their nation state in Palestine. And their argument is, in 4 words, can be told: this is our land. This is our land. We live here, and according to the international norms, following World War I, we have the right for self-determination, either in a Palestinian state or in a larger Arab state, as we would determine. Today's terminology, they are the indigenous population of Palestine, and the rights on the land are undeniable. So we have this kind of argument of the Zionists that we heard, and we have this simple argument of the Palestinians. But of course, Palestinians also can elaborate on this argument, on their argument. And when they elaborate, they usually add the following. And this I heard in conversations with elderly Palestinians for years. And what they argue is the following. First of all, they many times they insist and they mention that Palestinian Arabs were always peaceful. And they would say, you will not find examples of Palestinians go and invade other countries or go to occupy others' land. And they would say, we were always tolerant to minorities. And sometimes they would suggest examples. This is how I was told. Hillel, Jews were not allowed to live in Jerusalem under the Byzantines before the Muslim occupation or conquest of Palestine. But when Jerusalem was occupied, the Muslim Khalifa, Omar ibn al-Khattab, in the year 640, he allowed Jews to resettle in the city. So this is one example. And then they would bring another example. When the Crusades occupied Jerusalem in the year 1099, they massacred Jews and Muslims together and prevented the Jews again from living in the city. When Saladin liberated Jerusalem in 1187, he allowed the Jews back to the city. So you can see that Jews were protected by the Muslims, but not only protected, to a certain degree, they were also privileged by the Muslims. Moreover, we continue to look at this history of Jewish-Muslim relations at that time, or in pre-modern time. We would say Jews were expelled from Spain by the Catholic rulers in 1492, but they were welcomed by the Ottomans and were allowed, again, when we speak about Palestine, they were allowed to settle in Palestine. The Jewish community of Tzfat, that many of us know about Ari HaKadosh, about Rabbi Shlomo El-Kavatz, about Rabbi Chaim Vital, and other prominent Jewish scholars, of course, Maran Yosef Karo, who wrote the Shulchan Aruch. All this Jewish community lived under Islam in the land of Israel. So the history of Muslim-Jewish relations, especially or including in the Holy Land, is rather positive in ancient times and in the modern era. Even if we reach the 19th century and we take the new immigration to Palestine of the first half of the 19th century, the Jewish philanthropist Moses Montefiore, when he decided to establish new neighborhoods for Jews in Jerusalem, was supported by the Muslim elite of the city, whose members also sold him land for that purpose, in not other place than the Muslim Shari court, the Muslim religious court of Jerusalem. And the latter point is important, since, as you probably know, for almost 100 years, there are Muslim fatwas, rulings that forbid selling land to Jews. But this is new phenomena that has to do with Zionism. And this deserves a couple of words of explanation because it relates to our very point. According to the Arab Muslim narrative that we just heard, the Jews of Palestine and other places were treated fairly under Islam, which also obligated the rulers, the Muslim rulers, to protect the Jewish and Christian minorities, in the condition, of course, that the minorities, accept their political inferiority. Needless to say, no one in pre-modern times had the idea of equality in mind. So one should not speak about equality of non-Muslims, but about tolerance. But this tolerance enabled Jews to immigrate to the Holy Land to be welcomed, to be saved from Christian attacks sometimes, and to enjoy in the land of Israel freedom of religion, freedom of commerce, and to purchase land and build their communities. So one should ask, when we speak about the roots of the conflict, one should ask how from this tolerance toward Jews, the attitude changed 180 degrees to politics of jihad. And this is exactly what the Palestinian Islamic narrative tells us. Jews were welcomed to Palestine as a protected minority, and later, in late Ottoman period, as equal subject of the Sultan. However, the new Jews, the Zionists, they did not came to Palestine in order to live peacefully with its inhabitants and according to the local norms and social orders, but rather, as they had declared themselves, they came to Palestine in order to make the country to a Jewish state. And under these new circumstances, the Jews ceased to be partners and neighbors and turned themselves into enemies. Hence, the prohibition to sell them land anymore. Hence, the rulers and the community have the duty to fight against their immigration to Palestine. Palestinian narrative also have a kind of international dimension. I mentioned the international dimension of the Zionist narrative, in which the Zionists wanted and received a kind of international support for the project. But here, the dimension, the international dimension in the Islamic Arab narrative, there is a kind of emotional charge. The Jews, they would say, made an alliance with the Muslims as far as the Muslims had the upper hand in the world politics and in Palestine. But when Christian Europe strengthened, they forgot all the good that was done with them, aligned with the West, and betrayed the Muslim. The perception of the Jew as betraying the trust given to him, it should be noted here, is a perception that also has roots in early Islam. But what we hear is, and what I heard from many Palestinians is, for centuries we let the Jews into Palestine, but when European imperialism started its activity in Palestine, they joined forces with it. So again, we hear the Palestinian narrative, and if we hear only the Palestinian narrative, I think we can say that this is a coherent narrative about what constitutes rights, about the belonging to the land, about the causes of the conflict. Very clear. The Zionist desire to take control over the land and its inhabitants. This narrative less or more trustworthy than the previous one? Is there a way to decide between them? Do they contradict each other in the profound sense of the word? We will get back to this question in a moment, but meanwhile, I want to draw your attention to a crucial conclusion from each of the narratives. According to the Zionist narrative, the Zionist project is just and accepted by the international community. Hence, the Arab opposition to it and Arab resistance to it, armed resistance or otherwise, is unjust and illegitimate. And this very resistance is the source of the conflict. And in other words, the Arabs are the aggressors, the Zionists are the victims of this aggression. According to the Arab narrative, on the other hand, Zionism is unjust ideology because they invaded Palestine with no right to do so. And the international community's support of Zionism is based on a kind of Oriental approach towards the Palestinians, based on colonial thinking. Hence, the Zionists are the aggressors, and the Palestinian resistance is a mere self-defense. And here we are from early Zionism to present. The Palestinians also view themselves as the victims of the aggression of the other side, as the Zionists do. This is how each side portrayed the bloody events of 1929, if we take an early example, or the 1948 war, what in Israel is called the War of Independence. Palestinians would call it the Nakba. This is how the intifadas are portrayed. And this is how the current war in Gaza is portrayed by both sides. In each of these events, each side portrays itself, presents itself as the victim, and the other side as the aggressor. Now that we hear maybe again both narratives, and we ask again, is one of them true and the other is not? My answer is, as I said at the beginning, that both are true to a large extent. What each side tells about the other, less so. What do I mean, what each side tells about the other? I mean mainly that when Zionists speak about Palestinians, they would usually say, for example, Palestinians are not nation. There is no Palestinian people. We hear the same from Palestinians, that the Jews are not nation. Judaism is religion and not nationality. So what each side tells about the other is the way they see the other. But when we speak usually about self-determination, it's not about what we are told by the other, but what we tell about themselves. So this is one example of what is told by the other side as is less accurate. Also, when you read Palestinians or you hear Palestinians about the essence of Zionism, in many times one might hear that Zionism is about expelling the Arabs from Palestine. So from Zionist perspective, no, Zionism is about saving the Jews and creating a Jewish community, a Jewish homeland in Palestine. Palestinians do not, of course, view it from Jewish perspective. And what they say is what they experience, which, of course, is not untrue, but this is not what Zionism is about. The same is true when many times Israelis speak about Islam and about Palestinians, and they would say, you know, the Palestinians and Islam, there is they are supposed to kill Jews. This is part of their beliefs, that they have to kill Jews. Of course, as we can see from history, they had a lot of opportunities to kill Jews when the Jews were minority in Palestine or minority in other Arab countries, and they didn't kill the Jews in mass killings that was done in Europe. So what we tell about the other is not what the other is, but what we tell about ourselves is much more what we are. Now I want to go back to the question of aggression and victimhood. And I want to use the example of the War of 1948. When we speak about the War of 1948, the War of Independence, usually when Israelis speak about it and teach about it and write about it in textbooks and so on and so forth, and the question is, for example, even the basic historic question, when did this war start? The answer would be the war started after the UN resolution to partition Palestine in 29th November 1947. And because the Arab refusal to accept the decision of the international community, because of this refusal, they started the war, they launched a war against the Jewish community, the Jewish issue, and the war ended in a Jewish victory. But when we read the Palestinian historians writings about the War of 48, Walid Khalidi, Rashid Khalidi, it can be Saleh Abdel Jawad and others, they write that the roots of the War of 48, and in their perception, the beginning of the war of 1948 is the Zionist Congress in Basel in 1897, because the very decision to establish a Jewish state in Palestine, this is a declaration of war. So the war between 1897 and the 50 years until 1947 had many phases. So the war 47-48 is the last phase, or it's not the last because we continue to fight, but it is another stage in the war that started in 1897. And if they are asked about the international community and its support of Zionism, the answer is very simple. This is a colonial project. And as a colonial project, of course, the colonial powers support Zionism. Now, from Jewish perspective, all this is a totally different story. Because if I ask my parents and I asked my late parents many years ago about their coming to the land of Israel, of course, they didn't view themselves as colonialists. They didn't view themselves as colonialists because my mother, who came from Poland, she came because of the situation of Jews in Poland and because of the place of the land of Israel in her or her parents' consciousness. And my father, when he arrived in Israel from Afghanistan, he came because for many years, from his birth, he knew that the land of Israel is his land. So for them, the idea of colonialism is so strange. It had nothing to do with them. But again, if we look at it not from personal perspective, but from international perspective, from global perspective, and we ask what enabled the success of the Zionist movement, we of course cannot ignore the support of the international community. But this support that for the Zionists is a source of legitimacy, from Palestinian perspective, it's totally different issue. From Palestinian perspective, this very support is a sign and symbol of Zionism being part of the colonial project, the Western colonial project. And the point that I mentioned earlier about the betrayal of the Jews, the treason of the Jews who were treated well, and when the power relation between East and West, between Islam and Christianity changed, and they also changed their minds and aligned with Europe, this is again a symbol of dishonesty of the Jews. Again, and if we go back to the Jewish perspective, Jews, for them, they used the colonial power. They were not used by them in the sense that, yes, the colonial power sent the Jews to Palestine in order, for example, to protect the Suez Canal. No, we, so to speak, Zionists would say, we came here, we used the colonial powers in order to save the lives of Jews in Europe. Of course, not the lives of all of them saved, as we all know. So if we go back to the War of 48 and we try to understand this war according to these narratives, we can say that for the Palestinians, the UN resolution has no meaning because, first of all, the UN does not have the right to take a country and give it to immigrants from other places. This is one reason. And the other reason, because they know that the West, which was, the UN was under the control of the Western powers. The West is not balanced. It's not looking for solution according to what is right, but according to their interests. So when the Palestinians refused to accept the partition, from their perspective, they fought for justice. They fought for justice and they lost the war. But this, for them, doesn't mean that it was unjust what they did. If I speak in the name of the Israelis, as an Israeli, we had all the reasons to fight in 48 because there was no other place to Jews to come except for the land of Israel. So we can see here again, we have two narratives, and in these narratives, the Jews were attacked, so they are the victims. according to the Zionist narrative, according to the Palestinian narrative, the international community, together with the Zionist movement, attacked by diplomacy, but this is also attack, their existence in Palestine. And according to Palestinians, they were the victims of an aggression, and what they did was self-defense. And according to the Zionists, they were attacked by the Arabs, so what they did was self-defense. And this continues and continues and continues. And I mentioned the first Intifada. Yeah, Jews were attacked by stones. For Palestinians, it was a fight for the liberation. The second Intifada, the suicide attacks. Yeah, they wanted to have Palestine at least, if we speak about Fatah, the two-state solution, even if they accept the two-state solution, as Fatah did and the PLO did in 1993, and they didn't get what they expected to get because Israel continued and expanded the settlements in the West Bank. So they had to resist it. So for them, the settlements were another attack on their integrity, on their ability to establish a viable Palestinian state. For Israel, these were just settlements, and we did not attack you. So we can, again, the question whether, as in early Zionism, whether or in what sense the very act of settlement is an attack or not. There is a very interesting of a meeting of the Jewish Agency in 1937, in which it was during the Arab Revolt of 36, 39, in which David Ben-Gurion said behind closed doors, he said, we tell everybody that the Arabs are the aggressors and we only defend ourselves. But to tell the truth here among us, we can say the truth. It's true that in the realm of the armed conflict, they attack us and we try to defend ourselves. But to tell the truth, they have the land, they have their villages, and we came here in order to take the land and to make it a Jewish state. So of course we are the aggressors. So behind closed doors, it was well known. And it was also well known today, in the last couple of years when Israel ruled the West Bank and continued its settlement project. So the question of aggression and victimhood is not that simple, and it can be viewed in different ways, especially taking into consideration what options the Jews had during the interwar period between the First and Second World Wars. But the same question is also today. We can see the same question. Who are the aggressor now? Can we put the Israeli war on Gaza only in the context of self-defense or not? Can we accept the Palestinian narrative that the attack on the Western Negev was self-defense? Can we accept all sorts of self-defense? So even if we have these two strong narratives, it doesn't mean that we have to accept all what is done in the name of these narratives. Because what is done in the name of these narratives also should be under, I wouldn't say necessarily the international law, but under a kind of human behavior and humanity. So I think I'll stop here and open the floor to your questions. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you so much. And I ask people to submit questions using the Q&A function. Please don't just give history lessons. I'm not going to read comments. I'm only going to ask actual questions. So I ask you to please, in that spirit, we don't have very much time. So please just formulate actual questions. And I'll start with my question to start, which is, I felt like you very compellingly presented and very sympathetically presented the two competing narratives. But I guess my question is, what do we do about that, given that these are competing narratives that are in many ways in conflict? How do we, is the point then to try to reconcile the narrative, or is the point to try to say, okay, we understand things differently. We each have right and wrong on both sides. Let's put that aside and look to the future, because it seems that there's a problem for both sides in being completely fixated on the past.
Well, I ask myself the same question, of course, and I don't know what does it mean if we can create one narrative. And I don't know if it is necessary to create one narrative. I think the first step is to accept the existence of two narratives and to accept the legitimacy of both narratives and to accept the truth in both narratives. And when I say it, I mean that if Palestinians believe that we came to Palestine in order to kill them and push them out, and we say no, I mean, some Jews maybe wanted it, but many would be ready to live in peace with you. And if we accept that Palestinians are not here only in order to kill us, because this is not what Islam is about, isn't it? This is not. So at least we put ourselves in a place which is more able to accept the existence of the other. Because if you build, and this is why I differentiate between what we tell about ourselves and what we tell about the other. So when you hear the narrative of the other side and you understand him better, and you understand that his existence is not about you. I mean, no, I told it a couple of times because once after a lecture, I was asked by a prominent Palestinian scholar, why didn't you, when you talk about Zionism, why didn't you tell the audience that Zionism is about expelling the Arabs? So I joked with him. I said, okay, I will ask my mother if this is why she came to Palestine. So I really came to my mother and I asked her, what did you think about the Arabs when you came? She came, I mentioned, from Poland in 1933 or 34. Very young, 3-4 years old, and I asked, what did you think about the Arabs? And she told me, what we thought about the Arabs? We didn't think about the Arabs. We thought about ourselves. They wanted to kill us in Poland. We came to the land of Israel. So just to understand this basic point, and the same for the other side.
Yeah. And you point to another key issue, which is that we're really seeing a lot on American college campuses, which is competing definitions of what Zionism is and means. And I feel like this is one of the things that is leading to a lot of the confusion around the protests, because I think for many of the protesters, Zionism means the genocide of the Palestinians. And when Jews hear that, and I'm including myself in that, that's deeply offensive, because for us, Zionism means the right of Jewish self-determination, and that's completely compatible with the idea of a Palestinian state. So here again, I think we have two definitions or two narratives in conflict.
This is very, very important point for Palestinians, and now, of course, it's extended to other communities. Exactly, Zionism is, like the evil. I mean, Zionism is about, as I say, to kill the Arabs or to expel them. I was invited once to a Palestinian club in one of the towns here in Palestine, Israel. And I was introduced by the person who introduced me. He said, this is Professor Hillel Cohen, who is a very famous anti-Zionist and fights against Zionism. So I had to say, no, sorry, I'm not anti-Zionist. I do not fight against Zionism. But I know that the word Zionism for you is not the word Zionism for me. It's totally different understandings of the concept. Now there is something a bit tricky here, because what I gave once lecture in a university in Gaza by Zoom, of course, a couple of years ago, and they say, okay, but you speak about Zionist intentions. We speak about Zionist behavior, and this is a good point. But the Zionist behavior has to do also with Palestinian behavior. So we have here a kind of dynamics. Okay, today Israel commits war crimes in Gaza, but would Israel have done the same if there was no attack on the Negev? So, yeah, and the same for Palestinians. If Israel would have behaved differently, and so on and so forth. So there is no ideology by itself, but ideology and practice as is shaped by the practice also of the other side. So this is very tricky, but that should be noticed.
Okay, and a question from the audience. What should we do about the fact that many of the actions of the Israeli government or current Israeli leadership are contradictory to the narrative that you presented, that of the fundamental narrative of a just Zionism? And what can we do to try to shape or to change the path of the current Israeli government?
I think we should, if we do not accept the policy of the State of Israel, we should protest. We should say that we do not accept. We should say that this is not our Zionism. We should say that this is a kind of in Arabic there is a term صهيونية توسعية, how we can translate it, expansionist Zionism. So I think it's very important to distinguish between kinds of Zionism and to say, no, this is our Zionism, but this is not our Zionism. And to fight for also for Zionism, not only for the rights of others, but also for the rights of this kind of Zionism. If we everyone, there's Zionism that he, or non-Zionism, or anti-Zionism he believes in.
And do you have hope that there can be any kind of effect on the current Israeli government and on the situation?
The point is that in democracies, as you know, in the United States, the government is elected by the public. So and again, there is a dynamic, because when you have a government, they want to be more popular, and they do what they want to do in order to become more popular and to gain more support. So yeah, I think that liberal Jews everywhere are minority now. And the old-fashioned, it's not even the old-fashioned Zionism, because when I speak about, I don't speak about the Zionism of the Labour Party. I would speak about Zionism of Brit Shalom, of binational state, of one man, one vote, and so on and so forth. So there were ideas which were considered Zionist that today they are so far, not only from the mainstream, also so far from the margins of Israeli society. So we can hope, because this is part of being human being. But
and okay, similar question. Do you see any negotiating party on the Palestinian side that would be interested in listening to the Israeli narrative or even accepting Israel's right to exist?
Until last year, there were many Palestinians who I just mentioned. I was asked to talk in the university in Gaza. I was asked to talk in many Palestinian audiences in front of, and you know, the point of accepting Jewish right in Palestine, to accept it for Palestinians, it's very, very difficult. I mean, for them, it's really far-fetched. They have many arguments against it, even the argument that we are not actually the sons of Israel. You know, all this, okay. But as a matter of fact, or as a political, pragmatism and so on, and also in kind of communal relations. So yeah, they know that there are Jews here and they cannot be expelled and we can live together.
Mhm.
But in order to do it, you have, you know, to accept it yourself that this is, the land of two people. And this was very difficult also for Israelis. So the minority of Israelis and minority of Palestinians who accept this basic idea, for them it was very easy to meet. But then they realized that the Israeli side, they are very weak. The Palestinian side, they were stronger at the beginning, and they weakened. So
Mhm. Yeah. And a few people have asked about anti-Semitism around the world and how this is, and specifically about what happened last week in Amsterdam, and how you see those incidents affecting the conflict in the Middle East.
I think that more than they are affecting the conflict, they are affected by the conflict. I mean, they are a result of the conflict. And it was very clear also for me when I visited Jordan or Egypt and other places. And of course, I say that I'm an Israeli. And just because of our last question, the previous question, I was asked, but sure, you are not a Zionist. And I said, no, I'm also a Zionist. And I remember once when I enter a shop to buy shoes, and I was asked, and I say I'm Zionist. He called all his friends from the street. There is a Zionist in my shop. You must see him. And we started discussion. It was unimaginable for them to meet Zionists and speak Arabic and accept their Palestinian rights and so on. I say it because every time they would say, you know, if you accept Palestinian rights, we don't have problem with you. You can live in peace in Palestine. You can have your country, but we cannot feel we cannot not to empathize with the Palestinian and so I don't think that if Israel continues the war on Gaza or that is there any chance that the situation of Israelis, but maybe also Jews in general in Europe and elsewhere in the United States can be better? Yeah, very difficult
Yeah.
times.
And do you think, I mean, we keep hearing that the liberal Zionists, the liberal position in Israel is more and more is shrinking every day, that it's, doomed. Do you believe that, or do you think there's hope to restore that liberal notion of Zionism that is compatible with a Palestinian state?
I think that empirically speaking, when in times of war, 98% of Israelis support the war, and support what the government does until a certain degree or a certain numbers of casualties and so on. And especially after the what happened in October 7th, the massacres and the horrific things that were done to the Israelis in Negev. So of course there is support for war, but I think that when the war ends, but maybe this is one of the reasons why the war does not end, but when the war ends, the rethinking about what can be done would be revived, and people would think about it and they would accept that, okay, if there are the two options, to continue fighting until the end or to find any solution that gives us part of what we want and gives them part of what they want, and at least our kids can go to school and then to college instead of to the army. So I think people would not give up, the idea of living in peace.
And people seem to be getting angry because I'm not answering their question, because you only in the audience see your own questions, but I have more than 40 questions here that I'm trying to get through. That's including many people who are just giving me history lessons. So even though I asked you not to, so
Oh no, I think
yeah.
I came here to hear history
Well,
lessons.
yeah, no, I mean, I don't, I would rather ask you actual questions. So here's one. What you are describing is the difference between impact and intent, which is widely discussed in anti-racist work. and the impact is what counts. How is this different?
I think that, of course, the impact is what counts, but we have to remember also, we can take, for example, the War of 48. The War of 48 and the expulsion of Arabs from Palestine, the creation of the refugee problem. So if I say there was no intention to expel the Arabs, the answer would be, but the impact is they were expelled. The fact is that they were expelled. But I'm sorry for not remembering the condition sentences in English, but had the Palestinian not started the war, would they have been expelled? Mm-hmm. I'm not sure. So mm-hmm. Also the impact depends in what is happening. Mm-hmm. Had Israel, and the same is from the other side, you mm-hmm. know. So of course we do not neglect the impact. It's very important, but the impact is not a responsibility of one side. And I don't mean I have to say, I don't mean that the Palestinians are responsible for the expulsion of the Palestinian refugees, but I mean that if you take seriously the idea of analyzing event, you have to look at all the elements that took part in the creation of that event.
Okay. And just to clarify, because I am, all questions are welcome, but I'm really only welcoming questions here that I can ask. So another one, people are asking about the concept of indigeneity. And that is, of course, a buzzword on college campuses now. How do you define indigeneity, and who is in fact indigenous to the land of Israel?
Actually, I do not define indigeneity, and I not necessarily accept this idea. I mean, in my world of dreams, everybody can live wherever he wants or she wants. So the idea is that you do not take control over the people who live there, but not that you cannot immigrate. Because if you are against immigration, you have to be against immigration of Mexicans to the United States and against the asylum seekers who come to Israel. So the point is not that if you are here, it's yours, and other do not have right to come. Mm-hmm. So for me, indigeneity is not that important for me. Mm-hmm. I mean, what is important is not to harm the existing population, even if you do not cut. Now, in the Zionist narrative, the Jews are the indigenous people because Abraham lived here. I mean, you can take it more seriously or less, but this is a claim. And for Palestinians, they are the indigenous because they have been in Palestine or here before 1917 or before 1882. But all the time there are waves of immigration from everywhere to everywhere. So again, this is not for me. I know that it's a very important concept, but not for me.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and a question about so the question is, although I don't totally understand, why are the Orthodox Jews in Israel protesting against Zionism and being persecuted for it? I don't know if you have thoughts about that, or just maybe, also, about how dissent works within Israel and, people, yeah.
The Orthodox Jews in Israel, they do not protest against Zionism, they protest about their enrollment to the Israeli army. It's totally different issue. It's not that they are against the occupation, it's not that they are against the Jewish state. They don't want to go to the army, they want other people to go to the army. Mm-hmm. And people don't like it, and the policemen also don't like it, so they beat them. This is not high politics. It's something else. It's about deals between parties in the coalition, in the governmental coalition. The protest against, for example, the war in Gaza are they are always, but they are very tiny. There are dozens in each, big city, dozens or.
Okay, thank you. And maybe the last question, because we're out of time, but if you could say there have been a few people who have asked what you mean when you say you are a Zionist. What does it mean for you?
That I'm a Zionist?
Yeah.
That I'm a Zionist? For me, is that I think that Jews have the right to live in the land of Israel, not under foreign rule. And when I say not under foreign rule, it can be either in a Jewish state, it can be in binational state, it can be in a federal state, it can be whatever, but not, and of course with the Hebrew culture and all freedoms that one should have. This is for me one democratic state, but it can be two states, everything. But the right of Jews. Now, if I'm asked why the Jews have right to come to the land of Israel, I'm not sure they have the right. But I'm sure that the Jews that are here have the right to stay here. So it's, again, it's very nuanced. But, you know, Zionism is a great success. There are now 7 million Jews in the land of Israel. So this is a great success. So what we do with it is less successful, you know, as these things now.
Okay. All right. Well, there's we're out of time, and there, certainly was a lot of interest in your talk. So we might have to invite you back for another session at some point. So I just want to say thank you so much, and thank you to everyone in the audience. I'm sorry if I couldn't ask all of your questions. I encourage everyone to sign up for the YPSA YPSA mailing list. We'll be organizing other interesting programs throughout the year, some on Zoom, some in person. So I wish everyone a good evening, and thank you again to Professor Cohen. And it's very late there, we realize. So you can't hear everyone clapping, but I will clap for you. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Inessa, for your support. And really, it was very nice to talk with you. Thank you,
Okay,
everybody.
thank you. Good night, everybody.